You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for Deadly Uncle conversations.
All right. Welcome to the Deadly Uncle Podcast. I'm Trent Agecoutay, and today we have with us Elder John Sinclair. Now, John does some work with the Red Deer Native Friendship Society, and he also is a business owner. He owns a restaurant in the town of Trochu. So how's it going today, John?
Going very well today. Having a snow day in.
Well, I just want to, start things off by maybe getting you to let us know where you come from, a little bit about the work you do with the Friendship Center, and talk about your business too. Let's just get started. Let's get to know who John Sinclair is.
Thank you. Well, my spirit name is Kiheototema. I am a non-status Cree, registered Métis. My people go back to, on my grandmother's side, the Ermineskin band in Musqueam and the Ermineskin family. And my grandfather comes from Whitefish Lake. So Goodfish Lake, I guess, near Saddle Lake. And so they were both status at one time, but, through the laws and the policies that came along back in the 30s, in order to get some land, he had to give up his status. My grandmother was in residential school, and when she came out, she was totally a different person than that little girl that went in. And when she married my grandfather, they left and she never went back home. So he had to sign his status away, and then she lost her status.
Because she married him, right? Yeah.
So then he was given land up in Wolf Lake, which was a Métis settlement at the time, northern Alberta, right next to Cold Lake Air Base. And he lived there for approximately 20 years until they kicked everybody off and sent everybody packing from there and took the land back. So he was told, you can go to another colony if you want, or, you make your way. Right?
Yeah.
So, he lost his home, he lost his farm, he lost everything. And we ended up, moving around a lot and ended up in Edmonton. So I kind of grew up as a displaced Indigenous young man faced with the realities of the times. I grew up in Edmonton in the 60s and really felt the discrimination and all of that came with that. So that wasn't a good place for me after living, growing up in the bush till I was 10.
Yeah.
And just loved that life, So that's kind of my roots, my background, and my name, John Sinclair. And I live now in Treaty 7 territory, central Alberta. So I just want to acknowledge that I live and work on the Treaty 7 people's land, and I'm grateful that they allow me to work from here and sometimes do ceremony as well. So really enjoy where I'm living now. We have a business here named after our son Jesse, and his spirit name is Redbird. So name of our restaurant is Redbird Diner. It's a 50s diner, and my wife had an idea, and she made it happen, and we have this wonderful place here. So, very fortunate to have been married now 25 years, will be this year. And our boy that we had together, he's 23, he's a fireman and a paramedic, also a helper in the community. And, I've been a helper for 35 years, and been working as an elder at the institution in Bowden for the last 16 years. And then I moved out of there kind of when COVID come around. People weren't really careful around COVID. And for me, that's a dangerous um, disease. Like I have lung problems, lung issues, so I can't afford to get COVID. And so I left there and went to work for the Friendship Center in Red Deer for a while. I've been retired now for about a year, and but it seems I'm more busy now than when I was working full time. So I'm always open to sharing and talking, and really want to work with educating people
Yeah.
around the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation. I believe that it's a must. That Indigenous people have been classed as second class way too long, and that's how I grew up, always being uneven, walking in that way, and I refuse to do that anymore. So I'd rather use education to talk to non-Indigenous people and help them understand, that
Yeah.
we are amazing people and so resilient that you know despite how many years they've been trying to rub us out, that ain't happening. We're not going anywhere.
For
So
sure.
so I'm really liking that part of my life now. I'm pushing 70. I'll be 70 this year, and I'm really liking that. I'm being asked to do a lot, to step up and share and talk, share the teachings and talk about culture and teach people. So
Yeah.
I talk to a lot of kids as well, and I think that's going to be our saving grace is teaching our kids to share that kindness with each other and walk with pride, and be proud of who we are as people, because we're all the same. We're all two-legged people. We all walk the same. It doesn't matter what color we are. That's the message I send out. So I better just give you a chance to speak.
Go ahead, Curt. I'll give you a chance to speak.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's always great to, speak to one of our knowledge keepers and people in the community. And so I'm just wondering, when you were growing up, what was your first experience, when it comes to ceremony? Myself, I'm actually from Treaty 4 in Saskatchewan, and my mom wanted to move to a better place for better opportunities here in Alberta. But one of those things that comes with that is that I didn't really get a chance to get exposed to those ceremonies and the culture that would have been from the land that I'm from in Treaty 4. So I'm just kind of curious as to what is your experience when it comes to culture and were you exposed to it?
Okay, that's a good question. That just opens such a huge um, door for me, because I never knew anything about culture. I didn't even know there were Indian people that didn't drink, you know, because I grew up in all that mess, and my people were displaced Indigenous people, and I'm just going to call them Indians because that's what I am. I'm an Indian. I don't like using all these so-called politically correct names. We've been given names that change they change like flavors of ice cream. One day we're a
Yeah.
native, one day we're First Nations, one day we're Aboriginal, and now we're Indigenous. So I just want to be the Indian I was when I was a kid. And so we were displaced as Indian people. So we were never allowed to have culture. We were never allowed to even learn about it. My grandfather grew. He was born in 1895, so he was very cognizant of the culture of our indigenous culture back then. But they outlawed everything, and so you went to jail if you were caught. So he never taught me anything about it. So I didn't know people even did that until I ended up myself behind bars, and that's when I got introduced to culture. And a man brought the sweat in there, and the very first sweat I had was what spoke the loudest to me. I was in jail in BC, in the pen, and and uh, and I went into that sweat lodge, and it was just like I went into in back home. It was like so peaceful, so calming, so inviting, and it was just a beautiful experience. And I knew that it was something that I was missing in my life. So that was 32 years ago, and from there I started to learn. I wanted more of that. So I got out. I went to treatment, dealt with my addiction to alcohol and drugs, and found the culture, because that same guy who had the sweat was at the treatment center and had his sweat there. So I started to learn with him, and just been learning ever since. Now I did all the same things that he did. I went into the jails and started working with the guys and helped them, did ceremony with them, and been doing that, ever since. So um, that my introduction to culture came when I was around 35 years old. I didn't know anything about that before. And now, since I started to learn, I see so many people that do ceremony. I never knew them people before. So it was just amazing how that just opens uh, the world, really, because it changed my life. I have what I have today because of my walk in the last 30 years. And it's brought me um, a life that I could never imagine before. So when I think about that, our teachings as Cree people is reciprocity. So what you give out will always come back. And so I ensure that I want to give out what is good and kind for the people, because it comes back and will never bring harm to my family. Because in our Indian way, the way we believe is that if we do something wrong as elders or as knowledge keepers or ceremony people, it comes back and it hurts our family. And I never want anything to happen to my family because of what I've done. So I carry that teaching very strongly.
I was gonna say it seems almost like in a way it was meant to be your journey. You started to discover your culture in jail, and then you ended up bringing back those teachings to other people in jail. Was that a conscious decision for you? Did you want to go back and give back like that, or was it just that's just where it ended up by chance for you?
I think it was supposed to be. At the time when I first started learning, I knew I was doing it just for me. I was so greedy. I wanted everything because it was so good. And every time I'd get a new teaching would be revealed, it's like, wow, that makes so much sense. And it's like, I need that. So I just kept learning like that. And I kept going to the sweats and I kept doing the work. And I had to work hard. You had to go to the bush, you had to cut the wood, you had to get the willows, you had to get the rocks, you had to build the lodge, you had to make sure everything was done right. And all of those things they're not handed to you. You have to learn them by doing. So I was sweating every week for years and years and years. I don't know how many times I've been in the sweat lodge, over 500 times, I would think. But in that time, I learned so much about life. And so um, I never had a conscious, like, I didn't consciously want to go back and go to jail again. I
Yeah.
mean, I'd been there, done that, didn't want to go back. But the old man I was learning with said, you have the perfect teachings to go back in there because you've been in there before. You know what they need from that side. And he said, and I need help there too. So I was going in as his helper after I'd been out about 5 years, and so I went back in and I ran into my old parole officer, uh, that had done time, and he was my parole officer inside, and he told me, "Would you like to take some training to be a program delivery? We have a program here called In Search of Your Warrior that works with violent offenders." I said, "Sure." And so he sent me off for training, and then he hired me to be a program delivery guy. So that was my introduction to the jail again,
Yeah.
and it was in the same one that I was in.
Oh
So
wow. That is a full circle moment for sure.
yeah.
And now teaching passing on knowledge, I should say, to these inmates. In your experience, was you giving these teachings to them? Have you seen lots of success with them changing their own lives? The inmates that you worked with.
There's over the years, probably I can count the number of people that have really changed uh, on both my hands. So I'm saying maybe 8
Yeah,
that I know of that have done well, and some of them are passed on now.
yeah,
So there could be more coming up, but for the most part, um, you only change when you're ready, and when you finally had enough of the system, and you had enough of being pushed down and stepped on, that you want to do something different. That's when you're ready to embrace this new change. But they don't realize at the time how hard that is, how much work that is, because it's a full circle. We're made of those four parts, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. If you don't look after all those four things, then it's going to be out of balance and not very good success rate. You know, so so you have to, for physically, you got to quit using drugs and alcohol. Mentally, you have to start looking at your life, taking stock of the situations you're in, and how you place yourself in those places. And emotionally is dealing with all the stuff that's hidden inside. And Indian people, we have a lot of hurt, we have a lot of grief, we have a lot of pain, and we've been medicating that with drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, whatever addiction it is. So when you start to realize that's why you're doing that, then you can start to make changes. And then spiritually, you got to connect somewhere. Um, in our Indian way, it's with Creator and all the gifts that were shared, being grateful. Instead of being demanding and expecting everything. Because that's the mentality and the thinking of most guys when they come to jail. They owe me something, right? And so it's getting them out of that um, needy place to becoming responsible.
Wow, I think that this is Kurt Young here, and I think that a big part of what happens, with a lot of our, people that are, dealing with these things, like you said, is addictions, and that's one of the. I'm glad I have you on here because, what's been told to us a lot of times from different people is that before you're allowed to have some sort of medicines, that you should be have sobriety of at least 4 days. And I believe that, like, when that was created, I think that they were thinking about alcohol, and when you
Mhm.
see people's addictions today with this new stuff with, prescription drugs and fentanyl and crack and all these things, it'd be literally impossible for somebody to make it 4 days, of sobriety before they could get any sort of help. So, do you find that the culture and the ways of healing is evolving with some of those harder drugs?
It is evolving, but I just want to go back to that word you use, addiction. Um, if you're in active addiction, then they say, "Oh, you gotta be clean 4 days," right? I don't hold with that so much because addictions come in many forms. So if somebody went to the bingo last night, does that mean he can't come to bingo? He can't come to sweat today because he was in his addiction? If
Mm,
somebody's um, a workaholic and he works and works and works, and then can he not come to a ceremony the next day? Like, so you gotta look at what does addiction mean. Yeah, you can't come there drunk, you can't come there high, because then it's not helpful for you and maybe even put you at risk. That's a physical thing, that's a medical thing, that's something that natural law takes care of. But if we talk about addictions, we have to cover the whole gamut of addictions. And our people have all kinds of addictions. So for me, if people were okay to be sober 4 days, then why not 8 days? Or why not 10 days? Why not a month, right? Before they come.
mm.
Because 4 days doesn't really make that much of a difference. It's like a snap of the fingers in time. Okay. So for me, I'm like, if a person needs a sweat and he comes there and he's hungover and he's whatever, maybe that's going to sweat that out of him. Maybe that's going to sweat that it's the time when he needs help the most right there. And if you're
I
not there,
totally agree.
then what are you doing, right?
Yeah. I think we see that a lot. Like I worked with people experiencing homelessness for a number of years in Edmonton, and just being able to give these people, the ability to maybe smudge when they're on the streets is helpful
Yes.
to them,
Yes.
right? So it's like just being able to give them that connection to culture. I mean, sometimes the rules that you guys are talking about, they were there put in place for a reason, but I, like Curt said, I don't think they had the foresight to be thinking of meth. Like it'd be tough to take somebody in active addiction and methamphetamine, try to clean them up to bring them to a sweat, but to be able to bring the medicine to them on the street and maybe not let them handle it like people have said before, and still be able to smudge them or brush them down. I mean, that's very powerful things for them to maybe get them to that next step of their journey to where that maybe they want to make that change, right?
That's great. Trent, you talk about that. What you just said was um, it's not judging people, it's not condemning people, and it's inviting them to come and build relation. And that's our Indian way. So if somebody's sick and sorry on the street and homeless, and you offer them a smudge and you offer them an ear to listen, that's the biggest part of all they need is looking them in the eye and knowing that he's a person there in front of you. I've talked with a lot of people in that situation, and they say what they most miss is when people don't look at them when they talk, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
They don't even acknowledge them as human. So that's a big step right there.
And that's kind of actually, there's a little story behind how I got involved in that kind of work. I went to Vancouver to visit my brother, and he lived right in East Hastings. That's where all the rock musicians play down in Vancouver. There's a bunch of bars in East Hastings, but he lived right in the thick of where all the homelessness is in Vancouver. And my experience there the first time, just seeing how Like I saw somebody overdosing and people were stepping over them and not even treating that person as a human, just walking by, right? And it really hit home to me. So when I came back and I started working with people experiencing homelessness, that was really important for me, is to look people in the eye and let them know that, that to me they're just another person, right? And they're just in a tough situation. And if I can help, I will, because they are another human being. They're just like you said, they're just suffering or, in active addiction or sick in some way. And I mean, I've had some of my own relatives live on the streets. So it's important that we approach people in those situations, like you said, with that empathy and respect, and treat them just like you would treat anybody else. And just, I think that has so much power in it.
100%.
Go ahead, Curt.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that when I was in Saskatchewan, we were at we were honoring somebody that had been murdered that was 12 years old, and the elder at the time, there was a couple that had walked by, and they were under the addictions, and she said, I want to get sober, I'd love to. She kind of yelled it out, and so the elder called her over and said, hey, I'll do something for you right now. I'll sing you a song, and you can walk in this circle around us 4 times. And he said, and we'll brush the medicines onto you, and and I totally agree, because just that little seed could have saved her life that night, and I totally agree that they should be available, and it kind of leads me to my next question. Do you think that it's important for us to have safe spaces inside of our cities, to have ceremonies to pray, because they're starting to do this. I think there's one here in Edmonton, in the Fort Edmonton, where you can actually have sweats and ceremonies right inside the city, where you don't have to go outside of the city for some of the people who possibly can't make it. So, do you think it's important that we have these centers, popping up across Canada?
I believe that they are so helpful. You know, there's so many people that are looking for ceremony, don't know how to approach, don't know how to find one, don't know how to even ask for one. And so, if they're available for people to come to, I mean, I think that's a great thing. And again, you go back to, do you filter them out? Do you have to filter them through that 4 day process? For me, if people come and they're asking for help, my pipe requires me to help them. There's nothing in that clause that says you gotta wait till they're sober. You gotta wait till, you know, because if people are sober and clean and sober, they're not really needing much help. Go and get a job now, right? That's what you
Yeah.
do. You're sober now.
it's
Go get a job, right? Because you got
it
to work
seems
for
like an
life.
old sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, it seems like a very um, outdated way of thinking to have the 4 days. Like, like I said, I think it should be available for people to be able to have that are needing it.
Yeah. When you think about the medicines and the ceremony, they're given to us by the Creator. So because this guy had has drugs in his system, isn't going to ruin that medicine, isn't going to ruin that ceremony, isn't going to hurt anybody but himself. And that is the way of addiction. So, who are we to say, oh, geez, you're going to, you can't touch the medicine because it'll be no good then? Because that's not our medicine. That's the Creator's medicine. It's always good. It's just medicine, and what we use it for makes the difference. If we're using it to help people in a good way, that's our intention. That makes a difference. So for me, come and smudge.
Yeah.
That,
Hey.
that's called inclusion, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Inclusion is important. Now, John, you were talking about being married for 25 years, and now, and you were talking about the medicine wheel teaching as well, and how everything has to be in balance in our lives. Maybe you can give some of us younger guys some advice on how you've had a healthy 25-year marriage, and how do you make that marriage last through owning a business together too? Because I'm sure there's a little bit of stresses there as well. How do you make all that work?
all right. So let me go back to the medicine wheel. For me, I have a medicine wheel that's kind of unique, and so it has the four helpers and the four ages and the four um, gifts that were given. So the eastern door is when the sun comes up, we get the gift of vision. So we get to see what's so beautiful, in the world as soon as the sun rises. And then um, in the south, the sun starts moving across the sky and gives us time to develop a relationship with what we see. And then the third doorway is about um, having the feelings that we get from watching and looking at ourselves, and then dealing with those feelings in a productive and healthy way. And then that leads to the last doorway, which is about movement and change. So movement and change is bound to happen when you use these other three doorways. That's just a natural law. You can't not change. See? So when I started learning, the old man told me this: you have to sit in each of those doorways 7 years and use the gift. So I had to sit for 7 years and look at myself so I could really get to know who I am and how I do things. Then I moved to this next doorway and develop a relationship with what I saw. Right. So that told me the effects of all those things that happened to me. And then the feelings came, the guilt, the shame, the resentment, the inferiority, all of those little rascals that bother us. And then finally, change happened. But I had to sit there 7 years in each of those doorways. 28 years I've been walking around that circle. And then he said, when you get to that 28 year, start over again. Right? So I've been walking around that circle since I started. And when I met my wife, she was sweating with a group in the town where I met her, and she wasn't too happy with it because they were young guys and they were mostly looking for women, and so she didn't want to be a part of that. And the old man told me this. He said, "You never use the sweat to find women, right? Because that's not what they're here for. We're here to help people. People come here because they need help. They don't come here to find a man. They don't come here, to find a woman." So she wanted to come and sweat with me. I said, "No, you can't," right? Because we hadn't started going together yet. So I was making sure that she wasn't going to come and do ceremony with us until we got together as a couple.
Oh, that's your game on the long game.
Long game. So finally, we got, after a few 6 months or so, then we ended up being a couple. And then I said, okay, now you can come in ceremony, right? And then from there, we've been walking that same road together, looking at self,
Yeah.
and really developing our lives and how do we, and because I didn't know what a healthy relationship was. I never had one, didn't know what they looked like. And she had been through the same kind of emotional mess I was. So we said, we're going to teach each other. And so with love, we've been teaching each other. And she was the best teacher for me. And she's taught me how to become a husband, how to be a father, how to be a grandfather. She's taught me all of these things, how to be in relationship with someone. And it's just been, the end result is we have what we have today, this business, we have a beautiful home, we have all of these things. But it was, a lot of ups and downs coming to that. And one of the things I learned early on in the relationship was that she had a voice, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. And I had never had that before in my life, other than I saw my mom who was like that, and so um, I had to learn how to live with that. But that was something again that really opened up my mind, right? Because I grew up with the man's the boss, and I run this house, I make the money, I do this, I do that. But men can get so full of themselves and don't realize how really petty that is, So she's given me a kind of an all around picture, and she's just helped me so much in having a relationship with myself, really looking at who I am. And so we do have our ups and downs still. We argue and whatever, but we go to bed happy together. We go to bed, saying I love you. Have a good rest, have a good sleep, and that's very important in our relationship. Is that we don't go to bed angry. And I think that if I wanted to share with anybody, the best part of being married is don't go to bed angry, so you can wake up happy, you know. And so when I get up in the morning, the sun is shining through our front door, and I go and get embraced by the sun, and have a little morning prayer, and start the day that way. So.
Well, that's good advice.
Well,
Thanks.
Mhm.
no, that's totally amazing, and I believe that our communities are, just in the beginning of healing, when it comes to the healing process. Like, even my reserve, like George Gordon's First Nation, there was still a residential school open in 1996. So it's
Mhm.
right in the beginning of that healing. And, one of the things that we're seeing in our community is when men are, on that healing journey, you know, sometimes we have community events and stuff like that. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a screening with the documentary that I had, that I was screening at the time in Calgary, and I invited two different drum groups, and one was a female drum group, and one was a male drum group. And you know some of the women didn't want to come because of one of the males that was in the drum group, and he was in his healing journey, and he's already like 10 years sober, but he had done some pretty bad things when he was under the influence back in those days. And so
Mhm.
we're seeing these things happen. And so I'm just kind of wondering, I'm glad that we have an elder on here to talk about this, because you know how can we have these community events where there might be a victim that's at the event, and there might be somebody who's on their healing journey that might have done some things in the past. And so how do we how do we bring these people together, and how do we continue forward as a community?
Wow. You know that's a really big question, and there could be many different ways to deal with it. But for me, like I've grown up and I've learned a lot about working with different types of abuse, and what you're talking about there is if somebody in their past was drunk and committed an assault or something against someone, then and then they want to get behind it. They want to get beyond it, right? So they're on their healing path. But if you look at that healing path, it requires acknowledgement of our wrongs.
Mm.
So who's to say that the guy should stand up and say to his victim, "I'm sorry for what happened," or can I make amends somehow? Like that might not be feasible, or it could be. I don't know. But like that's a starting point. And if you're in a community and the community is there and they're aware of both of these things, then it's up to the community to kind of get them together and have a circle or something, right? To talk that through. Because I mean, if there's no acknowledgement on either side, then it just stays raw. That wound stays open and it
Yeah.
stays raw, and then nobody's healing from that. Especially if this guy's on a healing walk, healing journey. You're not going to heal if you got the stuff left unfinished.
Mm.
And that's actually a good point. I never looked at it that way either. We've talked about this with a few people, and getting them together for a circle is not a bad idea, because if there's still resentment and anger on the victim side, then maybe they're not healed from that yet either. So maybe that's an opportunity for them to start healing from that incident if you can get them together some way. So that is actually a really interesting idea.
100%.
A lot of times people just need to be heard and believed, right? And 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 acknowledged for what happened.
Yeah, and
And
like
that
you said,
goes a long
acknowledging
way.
your wrongdoing as well, like as the person who did the assault or whatever we're talking about. I don't know what
Yeah.
specifically, but for that person who perpetrated the crime or whatever, for them to acknowledge it publicly too, that's a big step as well, because it's showing
Mhm.
maybe the victim that I accept that I did this wrong and I'm doing what I can to try and move forward from it. So that is it actually. That's a really interesting way to look at it. Anyways, I hadn't thought of it that way before. For sure. All right. We all kind of stopped there because we're all contemplating that now. But thank you for that, John. That's really interesting. Now, maybe let's talk about your business a bit. Now, you got involved in this. It's a 50s diner, you said, and I know that you like to play guitar and sing as well. Like we've jammed
Yeah.
together in the past, and you told me that you've had jam sessions there at the
Mhm.
restaurant before. Was that a big deal for you to be able to kind of combine the business with your love of music?
You know, uh, let's say 5 years ago, um, maybe, yeah, 5 6 years ago, we opened up a smaller place, and it was called Sweetgrass Cafe. And so it was going to be a cowboy bar restaurant. And so it was small. There was like 10 tables, not very big. And so my wife wanted some kind of an open mic, or she called it a jam. So she said, "So you got to go up and start, right? You got to sing." I mean, I don't sing, right? I was kind of shy and didn't, I never sang. So anyway, I started singing then, and I knew some chords, and I just started singing along with all the old tunes that I like, my old country tunes, and this young boy, this young man, who went to school with my son, came there the first day we had our opening, and we had our first jam, and he came there, and he was 20, probably 18 or 19 years old, and he was a singer and played guitar and then chord for himself, and he sang and just did an awesome job, and he still comes to this day, whenever he can get away from the ranch. He's a rancher, and he'll come and play and sing, on Friday nights. So that restaurant we found was too small, because Friday nights was just packed. every Friday, and that was jam night. And so people were driving around outside because they couldn't get a seat. And so we thought we got to get bigger. So we bought a bigger place, and Sue's, my wife, wanted a 50s diner. So we went totally away from the cowboy image to this 50s diner and got a jukebox in there, and checkered, black and white checkered floor, and it's red and white, and it's just like the Happy Days cafe there. And so we did that, and we got a section over here, for the band, and we have a set of drums and a piano and a PA system. It's all stays set up, and every Friday we just have an open mic, and people come down and come and play and sing and do their thing, and so it's been great since we opened last April 1st. We had our open house, and then we opened up for business in July, and so we've been going since then. And every Friday there's a jam, and we have specials every day. One of my wife's claim to fame is that she serves two sides with every meal, right? So whatever you get the main course, and you get two sides every time. And so that's a big part of her selling features. She posts every day on Facebook, and of the special or the meal of the day, and she's the only cook. She will not let anyone else near her kitchen to cook any food. She says, "I am not letting anyone ruin my name," right?
Yeah.
So she's got a name, well-known name here for her food being so good and tasty. So yeah, she works very hard. So she owns the restaurant. That's her business.
Okay.
I'm part owner just because of we're partners in money, I guess.
Yeah.
And but outside of that, she runs everything in the restaurant. She hires her staff. She does the cooking, and she looks after everything. I have a different venue now that I'm retired. I guess kind of retired. I put a teepee up in the backyard, and I have sessions there with kids from the school. They'll come out, groups of kids, and they'll come and sit at the drum with me. I have a big powwow drum, and teach them some songs, and do that kind of stuff. I go into the schools and talk with the kids there, and I do training with the staff for Indigenous curriculum, and I do a lot of truth and reconciliation talks throughout the communities. I go into churches. I went into the United Church and did a talk there, and so I'm reaching out because my one of the men that I respect most in my life is Murray Sinclair,
Okay.
and I listen to some of those things that he says and talks about, and he said education may have been the thing that took our indigeneity away, but it's going to get it back for us too. So he says the more that our kids learn from the system now in place, the more that we're going to have future leaders. And I look at the premier in Manitoba, Wab Canoe, like that's where it's going, and I'm so I can really see that that's happening, and so I'm all about teaching the kids more.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, I know you moved to Trochu and you're set up there. There's not a very large Indigenous community in Trochu, is there? So are you kind of a pioneer out there teaching everybody in the school district and stuff, or is there a bigger community, or is your family the Indigenous community in Trochu?
I think there's there was we were the only Indians here when I moved here,
Yeah.
right? 16 years ago, there was me and Jesse. And that's it.
Yeah.
My wife is non-Indigenous, all right?
Yeah.
So Me and Jesse were the Indians, and since then we've seen that there's a lot of self-declared Métis now
Oh, okay.
because well, for whatever reason, but nowadays it's good to be Indian,
Yeah.
So so it pays off really, and so people are kind of identifying their roots now, and
Yeah.
so we have a lot more Métis here than we thought. But again, nobody is really stepping out.
Yeah.
Um, I'm kind of the Indian face over here, and have a friend that comes, and his family comes out, and they come and um, support.
Yeah.
And so we start doing. I mean, we have a little store at the end of our building here that we're opening up, and is going to sell some indigenous stuff, crafts, and we have some artisans that are going to come and bring their homemade stuff there and sell there too.
Oh,
So
cool.
so we'll be like the Indian store of the central area, I guess.
I only asked that because when my dad first moved to Red Deer in 1972, he told me he could name like maybe 4 other Métis families from Red Deer, and he was one of the only like status Indians that he knew of in like where he was playing and the
Yeah,
people that he had met in Red Deer. So it's kind of when you move to these smaller communities, sometimes you're opened up to a whole different world almost, and you're opening up a whole different world to those people as well. You're
yeah,
exposing them, and that's part of reconciliation as well, right?
that sure is. Yes, when I moved here, I was known as, oh yeah, he's that guy that counselor guy that works at the jail.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
That was how I was known, right? So now they say hi, John. I mean, they know my name now, and so I'm getting to meet a lot of the people. My wife's so open; she knows everybody. So
Yeah.
and people come through the restaurant, like, oh man, we've had lots of indigenous people come here a lot. You know,
Yeah.
they're traveling from south to north, or else from north to south.
Yeah.
So we're kind of halfway point, and once they know of the diner here, they don't want to miss it.
Well, John, thank you so much for today. We're slowly running out of time, so I want to turn things over to Curt, see if he's got any last questions for you. But I really appreciate the you sharing your knowledge and your time with us today. So, Curt, go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you so much as well for being on the podcast. There's a lot of answers there that I feel that there's a beginning that we can start to look at, and thank you so much for being on. And just one last question. When is the first age that you got a guitar in your hand? And secondly, did you ever jig or dance?
You know, I grew up on the island. Well, basically, I lived on the island, Vancouver Island, for those 30 years. I was learning pretty well, 25 of them, and over there they had a meet every year on the top of the Malahat, which was the mountain on the island, and it was a Métis gathering every year. And so we used to go there and jig, and I was never a jigger competition or anything. But back then, I knew I wanted to play guitar and sing. I didn't know many chords, but I was too shy to sing. So it's only been 6 years maybe that I've been singing and playing. And now, if there's nobody here on a Friday night, I start off the show. And
Yay!
one night I sang to one guy all night, oh, hour and a half.
Oh, John, you don't even know how many times that when me and my dad played together when we were on the road, that we'd play a Thursday night to 1 or 2 people, the 3 of us on stage for 4 hours, and the guy'd be yelling the same requests that he did the night before, and we'd say, we still don't know that song, sir, but we'll play you something else.
Me, That's a good answer right there.
Yeah. Well, John, I just want to say that you are definitely a deadly uncle, and we really appreciate you and all the work you do in the community.
Thanks so much. Really nice talking with you, Curt.
Nice to meet you as well, and I hopefully when Trent and I are traveling around, we'll get to drop by the restaurant there.
Yes, do that. That'll be great. Come on a Friday night. You can come and sing a tune.
Yeah, for sure. There you go.
You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
A safe space for deadly uncle conversations.